his lips. "Isn't this Joseph's son?" they asked. Jesus said to them, "Surely you will quote this proverb to me, 'Physician, heal yourself.' Do you hear in your hometown what we have heard that you did in Capernaum? I tell you the truth," he continued. "No prophet is accepted in his hometown. I assure you that there were many widows in Israel in Elijah's time, when the sky was shut for 3.5 years, and there was severe famine throughout the land. Yet Elijah was not sent to any of them, but to a widow in Zarephath, in the region of Sidon. And there were many in Israel with leprosy in the time of Elisha, the prophet. Yet not one of them was cleansed, only Naaman, the Syrian." All the people in the synagogue were furious when they heard this. They got up, drove him out of the town, and took him to the brow of the hill on which the town was built, in order to throw him down the cliff. But he walked right through the crowd and went on his way. Then he went down to Capernaum, a town in Galilee, and on the Sabbath began to teach the people. They were amazed at his teaching, because his message had authority. May God bless the reading and the hearing of his holy and sacred, immutable word this morning. Because his message had authority. Jesus was the authority. Jesus was God, Emmanuel, God come to live with us. You know, he had grown up in Nazareth. He had spent 30 years of his life there, approximately. He'd gone to school there, probably in the synagogue. That's where Jewish children went to school. He had worked in his father's woodworking shop, most likely, had learned that trade, perhaps another trade. We don't know what exactly that much about his life, his young life. And he had been part of the town of Nazareth, an integral part, I'm sure, no question about that. But now he comes back from being baptized by John and from being in the desert, and he comes back to his hometown, and he stands up in the synagogue and reads this messianic passage from Isaiah. And he says, "I am that Messiah that Isaiah talks about. I am the one." Well, the townspeople weren't very happy about that. You can imagine. Who is this guy? What's he talking about? How can he be so brusque about that? How can he be so authoritative about that? And they were sorely offended why he had compared them to the Gentiles. He talks about Elijah and Elisha, and he talks about both of those prophets healing Gentile individuals, the widow of Zarephath and Naaman. He didn't talk about the Jews. And moreover, he says, "I am the one that is proclaimed in this scripture." Well, they didn't like that a bit. So they take him to the brow of the hill, it says, and they want to throw him down a cliff. They want to kill him. Well, that doesn't set well, you can imagine, with him. And so we have here the background about why he's going to relocate from Nazareth to a town called Capernaum, a beautiful town on the Sea of Galilee, a wonderful town. Now, that's not the only place in the scriptures that we see reason that Jesus relocates from there. There's another place as well. It's found in Matthew 4, verses 12 through 16. And this gives additional reasons for his relocation. It says, "When Jesus heard that John had been put in prison," that's John the Baptist, "he returned to Galilee. Leaving Nazareth, he went and lived in Capernaum." There it is right there. He went and lived in Capernaum, which was by the Lake of Galilee, in the area of Zebulun and Naphtali, to fulfill what was said through the prophet Isaiah. "Land of Zebulun and land of Naphtali, the way to the sea, along the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles. The people living in darkness have seen a great light. Of those living in the land of the shadow of death, a light has dawned. That light was Jesus Christ. So you see, he has ample reason to relocate from the city of Nazareth down to this little town, comparatively little town, down on the shores of Galilee. Now, Isaiah had shown remarkable accuracy in his prophecy when he prophesied 700 years before Jesus ever came on the scene. And he talked about Nazareth being in the land of Zebulun, which it is. Zebulun was one of the 12 tribes of Israel. He talked about Capernaum, which is in the land of Naphtali, another one of the tribes of Israel. You see, the tribe of Naphtali was known for its fishing. It was a fishing tribe, and of course they had the whole Lake of Galilee right there to do their fishing on. They had the Jordan River adjacent to that. And so this was ideal for the tribe of Naphtali. And Jesus often crossed over that Jordan River. He went into the land of Herod, the son of Herod the Great. He went into the land of Herod Agrippa, and he healed and he did miracles over there as well. But the Jews despised this town of Capernaum. They didn't like it a bit. Why? Because it was full of Gentiles. Predominantly Gentiles inhabited the land of Capernaum. And they didn't like the Gentiles for a number of reasons. These people were not God-fearing, the Gentiles. They were wicked. They were unjust and just not up to the par of what the Israelites thought they should be. And you have to ask yourself the question, why would Jesus go there? Well, the answer is simple: to seek and save the lost. That's where Jesus went. He didn't go where all the righteous people were. He said that. I came not to save the righteous, he said, but sinners. So let me talk a little bit about the history and the location of Capernaum. You see, both of the cities of Capernaum and Nazareth are located in what's called the region of Galilee. The region of Galilee. Capernaum is located 4 miles east of the Mount of Beatitudes. That's where Jesus proclaimed the Sermon on the Mount. It's located 6 miles east of a little town called Magdala. Magdala. That's where Mary Magdalene was from. Thus her name, Mary Magdalene of Magdala. It's 29 miles northeast of Nazareth. You see, just under 30 miles from there to Nazareth, not that terribly far away. But it's located on the lake, on the shore, like I say, of the Sea of Galilee, this wonderful lake, this beautiful lake. And Capernaum is where Jesus performs so many miracles, where he does so many things. In the distance, beyond there is what they call the Golan Heights. The Golan Heights is part of Syria, was part of the Assyrians at that time. Today is part of Syria. We, the U.S., agreed with the fact that Israel should take back the Golan Heights just last year, a year and a half ago, 2019. And they did take it back. Why? Because the Syrians used to sit up on the Golan Heights and they would shell. They would literally put artillery down on farmers, on Jewish farmers, the Israelites, who were farming down in the valley beneath them. I've been there. I've seen armor-plated tractors out farming. That's how bad it was. And the U.S. said, no, we don't think that's right. So we didn't give it, but we acknowledged the fact that the Golan Heights would now belong to Israel, and they took it back. And they now own it. They now have it. Capernaum, you see, was claimed by Jesus as his hometown. In Matthew 9:1, he said this. It says this. It says, Jesus stepped into a boat, crossed over the Sea of Galilee, in other words, and came to his own town. He had been over healing 2 men who were beset with demons, not deacons. They were beset with demons across the Lake of Galilee, and he brought them back. and came back and came to his own town, it says in Matthew 9:1. It was also the hometown of Peter, James, and John, three of the most significant disciples of Jesus. And also Levi, the tax collector, Levi, who we know as Matthew who wrote the Gospel of Matthew. It was a thriving and bustling town on the Sea of Galilee, and it was positioned on a major trade route, a trade route known as Beth Shan. This trade route ran between Damascus, Syria, we know about Damascus because of Paul, and Caesarea over on the coast. Caesarea is where Pontius Pilate was the governor at the time that Jesus was crucified. And of course, and Pontius Pilate came into Jerusalem for that. But this highway was very important to everybody in that area and in that time. It was also important to Rome. Why? They felt it was so important that they put a tax collection station right there. Why? Because these caravans would come through there. It was on the trade route, this Beth Shan trade route between Damascus and Caesarea. And so they had a large contingent. They had this Roman centurion who was the leader, and he had 100 men under his control, under his dominion, if you will. And they collected taxes. Matthew was the tax collector there, one of the tax collectors that did that. It was comprised of ordinary people, farmers, fishermen, artisans, people like that, ordinary people. But like I say, they were Gentiles for the most part. Not entirely, there were some Jews there. It was a major fishing village. Why? It was right on the Lake of Galilee. And when these caravans came through, they would provide produce and fish and things like that to resupply the caravans. So it was very important in a number of ways. Now, there's a man who in the scriptures is a Roman centurion, and he had built the synagogue for them. A Roman centurion had built their synagogue. In Luke 7, verses 3 through 5, it talks about him. It says, the centurion heard of Jesus and sent some elders of the Jews to him, asking him to come and heal his servant. When they came to Jesus, they pleaded earnestly with him, this man deserves to have you do this because he loves our nation and has built our synagogue, the Jews told him. And so certainly Jesus healed the man, took care of him. Because you see, this synagogue became the center of a whole lot of activities that Jesus prescribed and worked in. In Mark 1:21, it says, they went into Capernaum, and when the Sabbath came, Jesus went into the synagogue and began to teach. This synagogue was vital, was integral to his teaching. He delivered the sermon on the bread of life there. We know that sermon very well. John 6:35, then Jesus declared, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me will never go hungry, and he who believes in me will never be thirsty, Jesus said. He restored the daughter of Jairus there. Jairus was one of the leaders of that synagogue. We know the story very well. Mark 5, verses 22 through 24. It says, then one of the rulers of the synagogue, named Jairus, came there. Seeing Jesus, he fell at his feet and pleaded earnestly with him. My little daughter is dying, he said. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live. So Jesus went with him. A large crowd followed and pressed around him. And Jesus healed the daughter of Jairus, who was the leader of that synagogue. Now, if you want to look at your bulletin, you can see what that synagogue looks like today. It's a white limestone synagogue today. But I want to say it was not a white limestone synagogue in the time of Jesus. It was then comprised of what they call black basalt, B-A-S-A-L-T. Basalt is a volcanic rock, an igneous rock. And there was volcanic activity in that area, and so that's why they used that rock, that kind of rock, to make the synagogue. the synagogue that Jesus worshiped in and taught in and preached in was torn down around 70 AD, the same time that the Romans conquered Jerusalem. They tore down the synagogue as well. And this synagogue that you see here on the cover was built around 250 AD, 250 years roughly after the birth of Christ. As I say, it's white limestone that was imported, that was brought in. And it's a beautiful synagogue. It's still there today. But it's the same, if you will, architectural design, the same footprint that the original synagogue had. And when you go and stand there, you feel like you're standing in the same place that Jesus stood. And you are. That's where Jesus was, in that synagogue. And all throughout that town, I'm sure his footprints are all over that town. So it's a very inspirational situation. Wonderful place to be, where Jesus walked. Now, not far from there, in fact, it's about 90 feet, there's a place called Peter's house. Peter's home was right there as well in Capernaum. He lived there with his mother-in-law and probably his wife. We don't know anything about his wife. But we know that Jesus healed Peter's mother-in-law. Here's what it says in Matthew 8:14. It says, when Jesus came into Peter's house, he saw Peter's mother-in-law lying in bed with a fever. He touched her hand and the fever left her, and she got up and began to wait on him. When evening came, many who were demon-possessed were brought to him, and he drove out the spirits with a word and healed all the sick. Yeah, right there. It was a big house, the house of Peter. It's been reconstructed today. You can go there and see it. Of course, it's not identical to what it was. We don't know exactly what it was like in that day. But there is a house there today, and it's symbolic of the one that Peter lived in. Jesus may have spent time with Peter, may have lived in that house from time to time. We don't know. When he came back, you know, Jesus had no place to lay his head, it tells us. So no doubt he may have spent a day or two or even more with him. And that house later became a house church because it was large and because the people could gather there and meet and think about Jesus after he had gone back to heaven. It's much larger than almost all the other houses were in Capernaum at that time. The pavements were made of lime. They crushed the lime and they put it down, and the pavements there were made of that. And a number of inscriptions were found in those pavements, inscriptions that were on jars and on lamps and things like that. And some of them referred to Jesus, to Adonai. They referred to God, to Yahweh, and they referred to Jesus as God. They were in 4 different languages. So it's a very historic place. Why? Because Jesus lived there. Jesus walked there. Jesus did a number of things there. I'll share some miracles in just a minute. Now here's what Josephus said. Josephus was a renowned historian of that time. And this is what he said and what he wrote about the town of Capernaum. He starts off talking about Galilee in general. He says, Galilee is wonderful as well as beautiful. Its soil is so fruitful that all sorts of trees can grow upon it. And the inhabitants accordingly plant all sorts of trees there. For the quality of the air is so well mixed that it agrees very well with the walnut trees, which require the coldest air and flourish there in vast number. There are also palm trees, which grow best in hot air. Fig trees and olives grow near them, which requires air that is more temperate. One might call this place the ambition of nature, because it forces plants that are natural enemies to agree with one another. It not only nourishes different sorts of autumnal fruit beyond all expectation, but preserves them a great while. It supplies men with the principal fruits, with grapes and figs continually during 10 months of the year, and the rest of the fruits as they become ripe, together throughout the whole year. For besides the good temperatures of the air, it is also watered from a most fertile fountain, meaning by God. The people call it Capernaum. Some have thought it to be a vein of the Nile River in Egypt because it produces the Coracine fish, which today they know as St. Peter's fish. St. Peter's fish are very good, as well as does a lake, which is near to Alexandria. He's talking about a lake down in Egypt, near to Alexandria. That's a description of it. It's a beautiful, beautiful town. Now let me tell you about some of the miracles that Jesus did in Capernaum. And it's only a partial list. Here's one that, to start off with, where he cast the evil spirit from the man in the synagogue on the Sabbath. Luke 4:34. And the demon cries out against him, against Jesus. He says, "Ha, what do you want with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." That's the demon talking. The paralyzed man that was let down through the roof was healed there as well. We know about that. Mark 2, verse 4. Since they could not get him to Jesus because of the crowd, they made an opening in the roof above Jesus. And after digging through it, they lowered the mat the man was lying on. We know the story. And Jesus healed him. Take up your mat and walk. And the man did. And then we learn also that the people of Capernaum eventually accepted Jesus as one of their own. Mark 2, verse 1. A few days later, when Jesus entered Capernaum, the people heard that he had come home. Come home. That was now home for him. He enabled the 4 disciples to catch fish when they couldn't catch them all night. They'd been all night long. Luke 5, verses 5 and 6. And Simon answered, "Master, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything. But because you say so, I will let down the nets," Peter said. When they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. Right there, just off Capernaum, the Sea of Galilee. And it was through a fish that Jesus supplied money to pay the temple tax. You remember his interaction with Peter. Mark 17. But so that we may not offend them, Jesus said, in other words, offend the authorities who are in charge of the temple, go to the lake and throw out your line. Take the first fish you catch, open its mouth, and you will find a 4 drachma coin. Take it and give it to them for my tax and yours. Right there in Capernaum. He healed the centurion's servant without seeing him in person. The man who had been paralyzed and in terrible pain. Matthew 8:13. Then Jesus said to the centurion, "Go, it will be done just as you believed it would." And his servant was healed at that very hour. And he healed the son of a high-ranking government official on another occasion without even seeing the individual. John 4, verse 46 and 7. It says, once more he visited in Galilee. You remember that's where he did the miracle of the wine. Cana. Once more he visited Cana in Galilee, where he had turned the water into wine. And there was a certain royal official whose son lay sick at Capernaum. Now he's in Cana, remember? Cana is almost 29 miles away, not quite. When this man heard that Jesus had arrived in Galilee from Judea, he went to him and begged him to come and heal his son, who was close to death. And Jesus did. And Jesus told him, go, your son is healed. The man goes back to Capernaum and he says, what time did my son get better? And they told him, and it was exactly the time that Jesus had said, your son is okay. Your son is healed. Number of miracles. This is where he met Matthew, the tax collector. You remember the story? Matthew 9, verses 9 through 13. As Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth. You know, this is where all the trade route is and all the caravans are going through. Follow me, he told him. And Matthew got up and followed him. While Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" On hearing this, Jesus said, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. But go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. For I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." And Jesus declared, this is the part that got very difficult for Jesus. But during his time teaching in the synagogue, in that synagogue in Capernaum, he said this in John 6:53 and 4. Jesus said to them, "I tell you the truth," he says, "unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you. Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life, and I will raise him up at the last day." Now, we clearly understand that today. That's simply talking about what we call communion. But at that time, they didn't understand that. They didn't know what Jesus was talking about. And so many of the people who had followed him left him at that time. They deserted him. And understandably so, perhaps, because they didn't comprehend that. But here's the thing to remember about Capernaum, I think. If you went to the open-air market, to the shuk, S-H-U-K as they call it, if you went there back in the time of Jesus, and you might buy some grapes or you might buy some produce, some fruits, you might see Jesus there at the market. No doubt that's where he went and bought grapes and produce, fruits, things like that. You might run into him. You might even see a miracle that he performed. You remember I've mentioned quite a few miracles that he performed there, lowering the man through the roof and a number of others. You might see him perform those miracles. Don't know what you might find. But the people of Capernaum, for the most part, sadly, didn't comprehend this, didn't comprehend who he was, didn't realize that he was the Messiah, or maybe they didn't want to believe it. It's like today. How many people do we talk to or try to convince about Jesus? And they turn a deaf ear, they turn away. A blind eye, they don't want any part of it. It was no different in the time of Jesus. They didn't accept even the Messiah when he was right there in their midst. And so as a result of that, Jesus condemned Capernaum because of the unresponsiveness of these people. Sad to say. Matthew 11, verses 20 through 24 describes it very well. It says, "Then Jesus began to denounce the cities in which most of his miracles had been performed because they, the people, did not repent. Woe to you, Chorazin," he said. Chorazin is just up the road a little bit from Capernaum. Woe to you, Bethsaida. That's across in the Golan Heights today, about 7 miles or so. "If the miracles that were performed in you had been performed in Tyre and Sidon," those are two cities over on the coast, the Mediterranean coast, "they would have repented long ago in sackcloth and ashes. But I tell you," he says, "it will be more bearable for Tyre and Sidon on the day of judgment than for you. And you, Capernaum," he calls out Capernaum, this adopted hometown, "and you, Capernaum, will you be lifted up in the skies? No, you will go down to the depths. If the miracles that were performed in you had been performed in Sodom, it would have remained to this day. But I tell you that it will be more bearable for Sodom on the day of judgment than for you." Oh, condemned Capernaum. condemned Chorazim, condemned Bethsaida. Why? Because the people turned a deaf ear, a blind eye. They didn't want to hear anything about it. They didn't want to follow Jesus. There's a great message there, isn't there? Very simple message. Follow Jesus or the results are not good. And here's the important part to remember about all of this, and especially about Capernaum. If you go there today, and as I say, I've been there, and Linda's been there. If you go there today, you don't find a single house there, not a single home. And it is a beautiful, beautiful city, right on the shores of Galilee. If you go to Chorazim, the same thing. Now, Chorazim's not on the lake on the shore of Galilee, but every one of those cities that he condemned is barren, even to this day. Nobody lives there. God is finite. When God says something, God means it. And Jesus is God. Very simple. It's a great lesson to be learned through that. Woe to you, Bethsaida. Woe to you, Chorazim. And woe to you, Capernaum. And to point out that if the miracles that had been performed in Capernaum had been performed in Sodom, that we know about, Sodom and Gomorrah, it would have been there to this day. That's what Jesus said. Strong message. It will be more bearable for Sodom on the day of judgment than for you. Amen. I would invite anyone who wishes to come and give your life, your heart, your soul to Jesus Christ. If you wish to commit your life or rededicate your life, if you wish to have a prayer or come and give a testimony, whatever it might be, I would invite you to do that. We're going to stand and sing a hymn of invitation. I would invite you to stand as we sing this hymn.